Nerdly presents the feed where the reels unwind. Off the real podcast, digging deep in the grind. 80 flicks, low cash, big.
So I'm going to start this out by saying that Bulldog Distribution has been on somewhat of a tear recently with some absolutely fantastic, lower budget, independent British movies. Movies like Signs of Life, Joseph Milson movie that I absolutely adored, and Treading Water, another sort of Little England, dirty, gritty, down on the streets, grimy tale, again, that I absolutely raved about. Some fantastic performances in there. Now we've got Protein. We're going to get into that in a quick hot second, but first of all, my name is Kevin Halden. This is Nerdly Presents Off the Reel. It's an Off the Reel review where I'm going to be sitting down and talking about the movie Protein. You all know that I like to cover everything from the big budget to the low budget to the no budget, but with a special keen interest on the lower end of the scale, and this movie absolutely 100% sits in that bracket. I will do what I always do, and that is that I will bring you the plot of this movie, then I'll talk about the cast and crew of this movie, then I'll jump into what I did and didn't like about the film, and then I will give you my Nerdly Presents Off the Reel review rating. I always have to take a beat when I say that review rating bit, because it's like off the reel rating review or review rating, and I always get it mixed up. But anyway, so I take a beat before that. So here we are talking about Protein from Tony Burke. A gym-obsessed serial killer murders and eats a local drug dealer for their protein. He inadvertently sparks a brutal and bloodthirsty turf war between the gangs. Protein is a movie of three kind of different stories. And the first story is that of our gang. So we meet this gang of like 4 or 5 guys. They're all total gym rats. They all kind of like hard nuts in their own right, but they also have aspirations of being the next big thing, the next gangsters to run the streets. And the way they're going to do that is that they're going to bring their own drugs in. So that is sort of like their main plot. They fall out with the owner of the nightclub, Llewellyn. They fall out with him, and then there's a little bit of tension there. They go off, they do a deal. At the same time, we meet a man called Sion or Sean. I'm not entirely sure how his name is pronounced. This is a Welsh movie with Welsh names, so it could go either way. He is sort of like a homeless war veteran who sort of just strolls into town looking for somewhere to work and a place to stay. And lo and behold, he finds that. Happy days. He finds a job where he can go to the local gym and he can clean up. Of course, this is the gym where our aforementioned gym rats are staying. And while he's there, he sort of becomes attached to a woman who has given him the job to work there. So this is where their stories interconnect, because one of the guys, who's a total meathead, total gym rat, he does actually go in and threatens the woman after she sort of talks back to him and gives him a little bit of act right. And our new man, who is the homeless war veteran, he doesn't take too kindly to this. So he decides that he's going to go to the guy's house and he's going to kill him. Not only does he kill him, but he chops him up into a lot of little pieces and then cooks him and eats him. So yeah, there's that going on. He does eat him for the protein. It turns out that this guy is, for all intents and purposes, a serial killer. So you've got those stories going on, and then we spend a little bit of time with a local police detective as well, who is joined by an out-of-town police detective who comes in to sort of help with this new case of this guy who's been butchered, chopped up, murdered, and they think that it's a little bit of a turf war going on with Llewellyn and the Bulgarians or the Albanians. So they think there's a turf war going on there, whereas she's pretty convinced that there's a serial killer on the loose. And as we know, there is a serial killer on the loose. It's our main lead guy. We get the Albanians coming into the movie because they want to get vengeance on them. Our meatheads aren't very happy about the situation, so they call in Hitman to come and do their dirty work. And the whole thing just spirals on from there. This is a dark kind of black comedy, I will say. Like, it is a serious movie with some serious undertones, but at the same time, it's quite funny. Yes, we're dealing with a serial killer who's chopping up and eating people, but we're also dealing with a bunch of guys who are just quite inept at being what they want to be, and not very good gangsters, if we're honest, and that's totally fine. So let's get into our cast and crew. And first of all, I'm going to talk about Craig Russell. Craig Russell plays our lead guy. He's on the poster back there. Plays it really well, actually. I really like the strong silence of the character. doesn't overdo anything. When he gets into serial killer mode, he gets into that mode. But when he's also just kind of blending in with the background, he really blends in with the background. I'm a big fan of what Craig Russell was doing here. Didn't get a massive great deal to do other than killing people, which is totally fine. I do think they could have done more with his storyline, but we will talk about that in what I did and didn't like. I believed that, he was eating people. I believed he was a cannibal. We get some really cool scenes of him cooking up the food and cooking up the bodies and just kind of eating it and loving it and then spewing it out and then going to the gym and training. It's a really quite understated role, a really quite well written role. So yeah, I had no complaints there. Then we have our gang members, and we'll start with the lead gang member played by Owen, who you may remember from Torchwood a little while back. He plays Dwayne. So he is our initial gang leader. He's the one that sort of kicks off the problems with the local nightclub owner. Dwayne doesn't last very long. He is our first victim to our cannibal serial killer. So he doesn't last a great deal of time. But he does help introduce us to the rest of his gang. Starting with Kevin, because my name is Kevin. This guy's name is Kevin, so we're starting with Kevin. Played by Steve Mio, who you may remember from Gavin and Stacey. He played Owen Hughes. And does he? No, he doesn't. I still don't get the joke. They never explain the joke. I'm glad they didn't explain the joke. I think it's funnier when you don't know the joke. He is kind of our comic relief of the movie, but also the guy that we're going to see most of the movie through. He's one of those characters we see the most of. He kind of sees a little bit of every side of it. Ross O'Hennessy is the new would-be kind of taking on the second in command role. I like Ross O'Hennessy. I've always been a fan of Ross O'Hennessy, and I will always talk light on him. I like him as an actor. I quite like him as a person. I interviewed him a few years back. Genuinely nice bloke. He plays Nick. And we get a really nice kind of twist to his story, because obviously he's the big meathead kind of man of the gang who's going to take over once Dwayne's killed. But we do find out towards the tail end of the movie, Ross O'Hennessy's character Nick is actually gay with Big Tim, played by Richard Elis, another actor that I'm not 1,000,000% familiar with, but I have seen him in stuff and I do like Richard Elis. But there's a nice little character development in their story as they go. Having said that, you don't see a great deal of Big Tim. He's usually there, just doesn't say a great deal. And then Gary is played by Gareth John Bale, who is also another character that doesn't say a great deal, but he's funny with it. And they make him seem like a bit of a dumbass, but then when he really comes into his own, he comes into his own. And I suppose the last two characters I would really need to talk about are Charles Dale as Stanton and Andrea Hall as Patch. These are our detectives, and Charles Dale as Stanton is sort of the local detective and kind of knows what's going on around about and refuses to believe that actually there's a serial killer on the loose. But Patch has come in from elsewhere and she's been following this serial killer and everything matches. The MO matches, so she's kind of like convinced that this guy is a serial killer and they're not dealing with turf warfare. I really like the dynamic between these two characters, between these two actors. They really work well together. And when you get those scenes of when Stanton's kind of telling her what happened to his daughter a few years ago and why he has this unshakable grudge against the local gangsters because of that, it's a really nice scene and it works really well. But it works really well because both characters and both actors are excellent together. You may remember Stanton from, I think it was like Holby City or Casualty. He played Big Mac, who was kind of the custodian that took people from upstairs to downstairs in the lift and pushed the wheelchairs and all that. Big Mac was a cool character. I just remember him being in that. So I do want to dig into our writer-director, Tony Burke, who I think here has done an absolutely brilliant job. The dialogue in this movie is funny when it needs to be, punchy when it needs to be, but also very severe and very somber and very mature when it needs to be. So as a writer, I think he's done a fantastic job with this movie. I do think there are certain storylines that don't quite reach the heights of others. I do think certain things are kind of dropped for the wayside, and I do think that there's a lot of things in here that, although they connect, don't really feel all that connected, and we will talk about that shortly. But I also feel that as a director, and by the way, first time director, yes, he's done a bunch of shorts, but this is his first feature, and I believe this is is a feature based off a short that he's already made, which is cool to see. I love it when people do that. We get a proof of concept and then they bring us that concept. It proves to us that, okay, you can do it on a short level, but you can also complete your goal and complete your vision in the grander scheme of things. So I really do like when we get to see that kind of thing. But he's shown us a deft hand. He's shown us that as a director, he knows what he wants to bring us. He's brought something to the screen that is entirely his vision. Feels really authentic. He brings a different vibe to what we're doing here. Some of that is to do with the score. There's a really nice sort of score to this. Never overplayed, always kind of understated. We also have Andy Tuvey on the cinematography, who, fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Makes this gritty, grim reality look quite beautiful and makes it really watchable in another kind of way that, yes, I'm in there in the dirt, but it doesn't really feel all too dirty all the time, and I like what I'm seeing. And I'm really, really impressed with what he's done for his first feature. And I keep saying that about films that I've been watching recently from independent British artists, and I feel like it doesn't get said enough. I feel like it needs to be said more. So he's done a great job. However, let's get into what I did and didn't like. And one of the things that I didn't like is the storylines I mentioned before. Although they run alongside each other and they do connect, I do feel that the storyline of the serial killer cannibal is really quite jarring in a way. And that's because for big chunks of the movie, he goes missing. And that's fine because we're dealing with the gangsters and how they're going to deal with this, the police and how they're going to deal with this. So to have him appear, and when he does appear, we know that shit is about to pop off, is probably the best way to go. But it does mean when you tie the two stories together, and I needed it to be a bit stronger. I needed him to really be like, right, I've killed one of these guys, now I'm going to have to go out and kill the rest of them. And he does kill a couple of them, but I was just sort of like, let that play out a little bit more. The serial killer side of things is there and feels a little bit like it was probably the main thing about the short movie. Again, I've not seen the short movie, so I can't overly comment on that, but I would imagine if you're doing a proof of concept for this movie in a short, you're going to focus a little bit more on the serial killing psychopath cannibal. That's where you're going to put most of your eggs in when you're doing the short movie. It does pay off, and it does connect. However, I just felt like it was quite a loose connection, and it didn't really hit the way that I hoped it was going to hit when it all came together. But what I did like is just the character work of our guys, you know, Rosso Hennessy, Steve Mio, all those guys, and then obviously Craig Russell, Charles Dale. Like, there is a lot of like actors in here that you will absolutely know, you will absolutely recognize, but don't always get the time to shine in their respective projects. And in this movie, it felt like everybody had moments to shine. Everybody had something else to give to the film, and they all started giving it. So it was great. I really, really enjoyed that. That is something that I definitely like. I love watching an independent movie where actors actually get the time to breathe, play with their roles, and play with their lines. And that felt like this movie did that a lot for everyone. So that was a big plus for me. Tony Burke, you've done a fantastic job there. There's not really much else I want to talk about in terms of what I did and didn't like. I do just want to say that I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I went into it hoping I was going to, and it exceeded my expectations in a big bad way. I didn't know anything about the serial killer aspect of it, the cannibal aspect of it. I just saw a poster that kind of looked like the Treading Water poster. I saw that it was a low budget British film, and that's the kind of thing I like to watch. I saw actors that I've admired for a little while now, actors that I like seeing pop up in things. So yeah, that all sold me on the project, and then I sat down and the project sold me on the project even more. Tony Burke is a direct, 100% checking out anything this guy does going forward. I look forward to seeing what he does, what he writes, what he directs, all that good stuff. I'll be definitely keeping an eye on all these actors. But yeah, so for a final rating for this movie, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. It's definitely a 4 out of 5. I just couldn't shake the feeling of the cannibal serial killer plot being something of its own thing. It's almost its own movie or its own thing, like outside the movie. I feel like it kind of just was there. They had this premise and it sets up the whole cockamamie shenanigans that's going to go on through the movie, but then how do you pay that off in a big bad way? I don't know. And then by the end of it, it's almost as if it was just there to be a subplot, which is fine. I do like that. But it was almost the most interesting thing about the movie was the fact that he was cooking these guys up and eating them, and I wanted to spend more time in that world, if you know what I mean. That's weird. That's weird, right? That is weird. That's weird. It's a 4 out of 5. Bulldog distribution absolutely on a tear with these movies right now. If you haven't seen Signs of Life, if you haven't seen Tread and Water, and there are countless other movies and projects that these guys have on the go, if you haven't seen them, check them out. This has been Nerdly Presents Off the Reel. Please do go over to nerdly.co.uk, our British website. Check out all the reviews over there. I'm sure somebody over there will have reviewed this movie as well. See what they thought of the film, and most of all, just support the film in any way you can, whether that's watching it, pushing it out there, letting people know it's out there. Tony Burke, I am 100% on your side. I can't wait to see what you do next. Keep smashing it. Keep showing us more of your quality content. I think this is going to be one of those movies people will be talking about for a little while once they see it, because I do think this is a movie that might fly under the radar, but then once it hits people's radars, it will start getting spread around, and they will get this like social media effect where people will find it. There's definitely an audience for Protein. 100% there's an audience for this movie, and I hope they find it. Please do go and check it out. I think you'll really dig this movie. It's good, batshit fun.